Assalamu alaikum. This is lecture number 20 of Pakistan Studies. The topic for this lecture is the 1962 Constitution of Pakistan. We will discuss this topic under three headings. First, we will talk about the background. Second, constitution making. Third, the general features of the constitution, which will be the longest section. Now we take up the first part of the lecture, that is the background to the 1962 Constitution. On October 7, 1958, the military assumed power in Pakistan under the leadership of General Ayub Khan, who was Commander-in-Chief of the army at that time. The military abrogated the constitution and the federal and provincial cabinets were abolished. The National Assembly and provincial assemblies were also abolished, and martial law was declared in Pakistan, and Ayub Khan became the chief martial law administrator, and in this way the first military government came into existence. The military government had to undertake lot of tasks, lot of administrative actions and other tasks during this period. One of the major responsibility that the military government assigned to itself was the framing of the new constitution for Pakistan, because ultimately Pakistan was to be returned to constitutional rule, and for that the military government wanted to frame a constitution for Pakistan. During this period, General Ayub Khan, who became Field Marshal in October 1959, issued several statements and comments on the working of governments in the past. The government circles were generally critical of the parliamentary system of government, which they thought was not providing stability to the country. They emphasized that any political system for Pakistan must ensure stability, continuity, economic development, and gradual development of democracy. Istehkam, तसलसल, इक्तसादी तरक्की और जमहूरियत का बतदरीज इर्तका. These were the primary considerations, and keeping in view, the government decided to take certain measures to move in the direction of framing the constitution for this country. Now we move on to the second aspect or part of this lecture, that is constitution making. In this section, we will talk about the steps and measures adopted by the military government for giving a new constitution that was later on described as the 1962 Constitution. The first step in the direction of setting up new political system was the introduction of new local government system, which was announced in October 1959, 1 year after the assumption of power by the armed forces. This local government system was called basic democracies, बुनियादी जमहूरियतें, and under this system the people elected 80,000 representatives for the local councils, and these 80,000 were divided equally between East Pakistan and West Pakistan. This local government system had initially 5 levels, 5 tiers, but later on it had 4 levels: Union Council, Tehsil or Thana as it was known in East Pakistan, District and Division. This system worked as local government and also performed the development work. The elections to the basic democracies were held in December 1959 and January 1960, and in this way the local government were installed. The next stage of setting up a new political framework for Pakistan was the presidential referendum, which was held on February 17th, 1960. President Ayub Khan decided to hold referendum for him to become an elected president, and this referendum was held on 17 February 1960. In this referendum, the elected members of basic democracies voted. At that time, the members of basic democracies were often described as the BD members, members of basic democracies. So the elected members or elected BD members, that is basic democracy member, were to vote. And in this referendum, which was held through BD system, Ayub Khan won the referendum with overwhelming support, and there was no candidate against him. After winning the referendum, Ayub Khan decided to set up a Constitution Commission. This Constitution Commission was established in February 1960, and this was headed by a former Chief Justice of Pakistan. His name was Justice Shahabuddin. In addition to Justice Shahabuddin, who was heading the Constitution Commission, there were other members, and there was equality of representation given to 2 wings of Pakistan. That is, there were equal number of members from East Pakistan and West Pakistan. This Constitution Commission was assigned the responsibility of doing 2 major things. One, it was to examine the causes of
failure of parliamentary system in Pakistan. You would recall that before 1958, Pakistan had parliamentary system of government. And when military took over in October 1958, parliamentary system was done away with. So the first responsibility of the Commission was to look at the history of Pakistan as it developed from 1947 to 58 and identify the factors, the causes that led to the failure of the parliamentary system. The second major responsibility was to recommend an appropriate system of government in view of the genius of the people or temperament of the people, level of education, the kind of political situation that existed in Pakistan, the state of nationhood, and also the need for economic development in Pakistan. In keeping in view the causes of the failure of parliamentary system and these goals or these objectives, the Commission was to make certain recommendations. The Constitution Commission visited different cities, interviewed a lot of people. It also issued a questionnaire and people could send responses to those questionnaires. And all these responses and the interviews which the Commission conducted in different cities of Pakistan, the Commission prepared a report, a detailed report, which was submitted to the President of Pakistan in May 1961. This report provides an analysis of the political history of Pakistan from 47 to 58, identifying the causes of failure of the parliamentary system during the first 11 years. Then it suggests a number of principles, guidelines for framing a new constitution. This report, which was published as the report of the Constitution Commission 1961, is available in the libraries. This report was first reviewed by two committees. One committee comprised the members of the presidential cabinet, and the second committee consisted of the senior bureaucrats who looked into the practical aspects of this report, how this is to be implemented. The report was also discussed in the governors' conference and also by other people who were able to get information on this report. After detailed deliberations on the recommendations of the Constitution Commission, President Ayub Khan announced the new constitution on March 1st, 1962. The constitution, as announced, did not incorporate all the recommendations of the Constitution Commission. Most of its recommendations were incorporated, but some were not. And in this way, Constitution was announced. The next stage was that in April and May 1962, elections for the National Assembly and provincial assemblies were held. These elections were indirect. That is, the BD members or the members of the basic democracies elected the members of National Assembly and the two provincial assemblies. So in this way, this was the system of indirect elections, where people elect an electoral college, and those people then elect the members of national and provincial assemblies. This is indirect election, and this was the system introduced in 1962 for the 1962 Constitution. Once the assemblies were elected, that is the National Assembly and the provincial assemblies, the Constitution was enforced on 8th June 1962. And on that day, martial law was withdrawn, military rule came to an end, and the new constitution that was framed by the military government of Ayub Khan became the Constitution of Pakistan, and from June 8th onward, Pakistani system was functioning under this new constitution. This constitution had 250 articles and 5 schedules. Initially there were 3, 2 were added later on, so you can say 5 schedules were there in the constitution. Now we move on to the third part of our lecture. In the second part, we have seen how Constitution was framed, what were the steps or stages in the formulation of the 1962 Constitution. In this third part, we will try to outline the general characteristics of the Constitution, or we will try to explain the type of political system that was created under the new Constitution of Pakistan. First, let's take up the title of the state. When the Constitution was enforced on June 8th, 1962, the title of the state was given as the Republic of Pakistan. But there was a demand in the assembly and outside the assembly that this title should be changed to Islamic Republic of Pakistan. That is, the demand was to go back to the title that was provided in the earlier constitution, the 1956 constitution. The 1956 constitution described Pakistan as the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. So, after some thinking on this issue, first amendment was introduced in the Constitution, which dealt with number of issues, but here one issue is important for us. That is, the word Islamic was inserted
in the title, and therefore Pakistan once again became the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. The second outstanding feature of the Constitution was the presidential system of government. In this way, the 62 Constitution marked a departure from the 1956 Constitution, which we have discussed in our earlier lecture. The 1956 Constitution had provided for parliamentary system of government. But in 1962, this was replaced with presidential system of government. The Constitution provided for a very powerful president who had vast administrative powers and other authority to handle the affairs of the state. In a way, the president was the focal point of the Constitution. It was around him that Constitution was revolving. Constitution provided that a person could become president or could contest the election for president of Pakistan if he has the minimum age of 40 years, he should be a Muslim and qualified to be the member of the National Assembly. In this Constitution, the President, like the members of the National Assembly, was indirectly elected. The members of basic democracies, which were 80,000 in number, were made the electoral college for the president. So the BD members elected President of Pakistan under the 1962, and his term was for 5 years. If a president has held the office for more than 8 years, he could seek re-election if his candidature is allowed or permitted or approved by the National Assembly and the provincial assemblies. To simplify what I have said, that a person could stay president for 2 terms, consecutive terms, one after the other, and each term was for 5 years, so a person could hold that office for 10 years. Now, if that person wanted to go beyond, that is for the 3rd term, then his candidature had to be approved by the National Assembly and the 2 provincial assemblies, and then he could go for elections the way it was provided in the Constitution, which is indirect elections through the elected members of the basic democracies. Although the president's term was fixed for 5 years, the president could be removed from his office by the National Assembly. This is called the impeachment process or impeachment of the president. That is, president could be removed through impeachment. However, the impeachment procedure was very difficult, very cumbersome, and it wasn't easy to remove a president from his office until the expiry of his tenure, which was 5 years. Normally, in presidential systems, president doesn't have power to dissolve the National Assembly or the Parliament. Here, in the 1962 Constitution, this power was given to the President. President could dissolve the National Assembly, call for new elections, but there was one condition. That is, if the President would dissolve the National Assembly, he will himself go for the elections. That is, he will have to seek his own re-election. This, for all practical purposes, meant that President would not dissolve the National Assembly, because if he dissolved the National Assembly, then it is not the members of the National Assembly who would have to seek re-election, but the President will have to get a new mandate, a new vote from Electoral College. So that means that the President would be extremely reluctant to take such a step, and for all practical purposes he would not remove the National Assembly, although he was given this kind of power in a conditional manner. If we look at the powers of the President, then, as I said earlier, President was the focal point of the political system, the central piece of the political system. He had executive powers, legislative powers, because he was part of the legislative process, and certain judicial powers. The cabinet was appointed by the President, and the cabinet was responsible to the President. President could remove a cabinet member anytime he wanted. And other key appointments in the state were also to be made by the President. I give you some examples of the appointments, like the Chief Justice and judges of the Supreme Court, Chief Justice and judges of the High Courts, the 3 commanders of the armed forces, chairmen and members of the Public Service Commission, and some other. But there was a procedure for making these appointments. But ultimately, it was the responsibility of the President to make these appointments. President also had the power to issue ordinances when the National Assembly was not in session. President also had emergency powers. That is, if state of emergency had been declared in the country, then President's powers were enhanced. Emergency could be declared in the country for 3 major reasons. External threat. There is a war imposed on country, as was the case in September 1965 when India attacked Pakistan. State of emergency was declared in Pakistan. So, external threat is one factor or one situation. Internal disturbances. there are developments within country, that is Pakistan, which threaten the security, then emergency powers could be invoked. Third, a very serious economic crisis, economic threat to the security of the state. So in these kind of situations, President could declare emergency and assume extraordinary powers. And then he had a freer hand to function, but within the limits prescribed by the Constitution of Pakistan. President was part of the legislative process, where he would be dealing with legislation, but we will discuss about his legislative powers when we discuss the National Assembly, which is the third feature of the Constitution. The third feature was that it provided for a single house legislature. Like the 1956 Constitution, this Constitution provided a single house called the National Assembly. And in this National Assembly, both the wings of Pakistan, that is East Pakistan and West Pakistan, had equal representation, or what is called the principle of parity. The principle of parity between the two wings of Pakistan was part of the Constitution. This reflected here in the composition of the National Assembly, and this also reflected in the strength or membership of the basic democracies, where equal number of elected BD members came from two wings of Pakistan. The strength of the House or the membership of the National Assembly was 156. 150 were the general seats, and 6 seats were reserved for women. The general seats were elected through an indirect election. That is, the BD members constituted the electoral college for the members of National Assembly. The same applied to the provincial assemblies. Both the members of the National Assembly, as was the case in 1962, and members of the two provincial assemblies were elected by this electoral college, that is the members of the basic democracies. The minimum age was 25, and a candidate must be registered as a voter anywhere in Pakistan. In some constituency, he must be a voter and citizen of Pakistan. This assembly, the National Assembly, had law-making powers, could make laws for the issues and for powers given to the federal government. However, all laws passed by the National Assembly would go to the President. And at that stage, before these are signed by the President, they are called bills. So the President could sign the law which has been passed in the form of bill, reject it, or return the bill for reconsideration to the National Assembly. There was a procedure through which the National Assembly could accept the recommendations of the President or could return the bill to the President. So there was a procedure to deal with the situation, but President was part of the legislative process. So far as financial powers was concerned, these powers were somewhat limited. The National Assembly could vote on new expenditure. New expenditure means those items in the national budget which are included for the first time. That is why they are new expenditure. It had the power to accept or reject the new expenditure. But there were two other categories of expenditure which it could not turn down. One, the consolidated fund list, which included salaries for certain important offices under the state of Pakistan. This was the same in the 56th Constitution. However, 62 Constitution also provided for another thing: recurring expenditure. Recurring expenditure could not be rejected. Recurring expenditure here meant the expenditure which was coming from previous years. This was the expenditure for multi-year projects. For example, a project is there for 2, 3, 4 years. When that project comes in for the first time, it falls in the category of the new expenditure because it has gone in the budget for the first time, so it's a new expenditure. At that stage, Assembly could accept it, reject it. But once it is repeated next year, the same amount for the same project, then it is recurring. It is coming back again. And recurring expenditure could not be turned down so as to ensure that multi-year projects are not terminated while they are in the process of completion. The next important feature of the Constitution is federalism. The 1962 Constitution established a federal system of government, which meant two types of governments: government at the center, or the central government or the federal government, and then the governments at the provincial levels. There were two provinces at that time: province of East Pakistan and province of West Pakistan. So there were two governments, one for each province, functioning within the field, within the limits defined by the Constitution. The 1962 Constitution provided one list of subjects. One set of powers were clearly laid down in the Constitution, and those were the powers of the central government. So the one list pertained to the powers of the central government, and rest of the powers were given to the provinces. However, the federation under the 1962 Constitution had a strong center. It becomes strong center because there was a powerful president, a president who had enough power, enough authority to manage the central as well as provincial affairs. And if we look at the emergency powers, then he has greater freedom to intervene in the provincial affairs. So it was a strong center under the 1962 Constitution. Although provincial autonomy was there was a provincial setup in each province, a governor who has his cabinet, and governor was appointed by the president, and governor would appoint the cabinet with the approval of the president. And each province had its legislature or provincial assembly for law-making purposes. Here, the authority of the governor was strong. He was the head of government under the 1962 at the provincial level. So we could say that there was provincial administration, provincial government, autonomy, but center was strong under the 1962 Constitution. The fifth feature is that the Constitution provided principles of policy making. These principles were guidelines for policy makers, and these principles emphasized national solidarity, that policies would be designed to promote national solidarity. The policies would take care of the interests of the backward people, backward castes, backward areas, and other principles like opportunities would be provided to people to take part in national life, emphasis on Islamic way of life, on Islamic system, Islamic teachings, Islamic principles. These were the principles given in the Constitution, and these principles were simply guidelines for those who were to make policies of Pakistan. The sixth feature was fundamental rights. Like the previous Constitution, the 62 Constitution provided certain political and civil rights to the people. And these were the standard rights which are given in democratic systems. Right to speech, right to organization, right to movement, protection of life, security, freedom of religion, and such rights which are part of any democratic setup. These were there in the Constitution, and these could be invoked in court of law. But I may mention here that when Constitution was enforced on 8th June 1962, these fundamental rights were given in the Constitution as principles of lawmaking, not as fundamental rights. Then there was a demand that these should be fundamental rights rather than principles of lawmaking, and in view of the demand, public demand in the National Assembly and outside the National Assembly, these principles of lawmaking were changed into fundamental rights under an amendment to the Constitution.
and in this way the standard democratic civil and political rights became part of the Constitution. The seventh feature pertained to political parties. When Constitution was enforced in June 1962, political parties were not allowed in Pakistan. There was a ban on political parties. And the elections to the national and provincial assemblies in April and May 1962 were partyless elections. Now, once the National Assembly began to function, the members thought that Pakistan must have functioning political parties. Therefore, a Political Parties Act was passed in 1962 to provide for working of political parties under the Constitution of Pakistan. And after the passing of this law, Political Parties Act 1962, political parties began to function in Pakistan. Eighth important feature of the Constitution pertains to the Islamic provisions of the Constitution. I have discussed about the title of the state of Pakistan, which was Islamic Republic of Pakistan. If we look at the preamble of the Constitution reflects the objectives resolution. And Constitution assigns sovereignty all over universe to Almighty Allah. And it is to be exercised within the limits prescribed by Him in the Quran and Sunnah. If we look at the principles of policy making, there are clear provisions for Islamic way of life and Islamic principles. For example, state is to enable people to lead their lives in accordance with the principles of Islam and teachings of Islam. Two important institutions were created. One, the Advisory Council of Islamic Ideology, which comprised the scholars of Islam and law and politics. And this was to make sure that laws are in conformity with Islamic principles. But this was an advisory body. This was to advise the Parliament or the National Assembly and the President. The second important institution was the Islamic Research Institute, which was set up under this Constitution for devoting itself to research and instructions in Islam for assisting the reconstruction of Muslim society on truly Islamic lines. In other words, we could say that this Constitution also emphasized the Islamic character of the polity. This Constitution functioned from June 8th, 1962 to March 25th, 1969. This concludes our discussion of the 1962 Constitution. Khuda Hafiz until the next lecture.